in my head, I'm counting the reps, and then once it starts to get hard, I'm like, okay, now we're actually counting. So today we're gonna do a push day, a little bit of a chest focus because I am gonna have shoulder and arm days later this week. So before my training sessions, I usually have very small meal. Don't even know if you can call it a meal. Really just a few carbs, try and get something that's gonna be light on my stomach. The reason why, you know, for me, my background's in powerlifting, right? And so now that I'm competing as a bodybuilder, keeping my waist size in check is kind of difficult. I have kind of a thick torso because of all the heavy bracing that I've done over the years, and then just genetics on top of that. For me, keeping my meals very small is helpful. So doing lots of small meals, almost kind of grazing throughout the day, is one way to avoid any type of issues with abdominal control. It's not so much the abdominal size, it's more the ability to keep that abdominal wall in tight all the time. So that's why I'm going to start out with just a couple rice cakes of jelly, get a little bit of sugar before my training, got my Monster, and then we'll go through. Today won't be super heavy. I am traveling. I don't like to push it, you know, the first day after getting off a flight. I'm just a little bit worried about, you know, keeping the joints healthy and all that stuff, but we should be able to get some good work done. I'm going to get bored of this very quickly. And then I put salt on everything. I think salt's very important if you're training for anything. You're going to get better pumps with salt. You're going to be more hydrated. You're going to have less chance of injury. And as long as you're drinking enough, as long as you're doing your cardio, you're probably not going to have issues with blood pressure. That's something that runs in your family. You got to be careful about it, but I've been pretty good. So I had a pretty big meal of egg whites and ground beef right before headed over here. So I've got plenty of protein. And I got my intra-workout shake over here somewhere where generally do about, it depends on what stage my training's in, but for right now it's about 50 grams of carbs, and then I'll have around 15 grams of EAAs in there as well. So, and then after training, I got my chicken and my rice in here somewhere. So be ready for that as well. We're going to start off with a little bit of activation stuff, just get a little bit of blood flow, kind of help ease into that mind-muscle connection. I draw on a lot of different influencers, I guess, for the way I structure my training. And when it comes to exercise sequencing, what I'm going to do in what order, I really like the stuff that John Meadows talks about. So you're generally going to start off with some type of activation, and then some type of movement that's going to be, borrow a term from Renaissance periodization, low SFR, right? So your stress to fatigue ratio is one that you're not going to be beating your joints up a lot. It's not going to be something that's hurting you. It's not going to be something that's fatiguing you too much, but it is going to be something that allows you to get a really good pump going. And then we'll go into some of the heavier work. First movement we're going to do is this prime incline press. This one I've used before. I really like it. I'll talk about this a little bit more, but one of my weaknesses in terms of aesthetics is my upper chest. And the reason for that is, in my powerlifting background, I'm very used to allowing my elbows to flare through the mid-range to kind of finish a rep of bench. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. If your goal is maximal strength, that typically will put your bar in a better position if you can allow your elbows to flare at the proper point in the lift. For bodybuilding, it's not a great thing because it's going to shift emphasis away from the muscle groups that you're trying to train. So with this prime machine, I can distribute the weight such that it's going to be a little bit easier through that mid-range. It's going to allow me to keep my elbows tucked, allow me to finish the movement by using that upper pec. And like I mentioned earlier in the video, this is going to be one that's not going to beat my joints up a lot, so I'll be able to get a good pump going before we go into heavier work, which is going to be some type of floor press today, and I'll make that call in a little bit. This converging aspect, right, how my elbow is starting out further away from my body, it's ending a little bit closer in, that type of movement is going to allow you to get more chest activation than something where you're pressing in a straight line. It's probably hard to see with the hoodie on, but one of the issues, again, that I have with bodybuilding is I tend to be overbraced, right? So when I'm training, I want to use my core as much as possible to stabilize myself, so I pull my rib cage down by contracting my abs. A lot of times that's a problem because when you're pulling the rib cage down, you're not exposing some of the muscle groups to the load that you want to, in particular the upper chest. So I have to make a conscious effort to go into a little bit of thoracic extension. I'm using my transverse abdominis to stabilize my core rather than the rectus abdominis, right? So I'm trying to pull that belly button in towards the spine, and I'm trying to breathe through my diaphragm. And all those things are make very small differences, But at the pro level in bodybuilding, they add up. Now, if you're just starting out and you're not so concerned about, you know, doing the absolute most with your physique possible, it's not something I would recommend spending a lot of time thinking about. But if you are, you know, paying attention to your breathing patterns, paying attention to your spinal position, paying attention to what you're doing with your core is extremely important.
Как он себя чувствует?
Yes, how do you feel? You're so big.
I'm trying to explain to her because she's like, is he famous? And I'm like, yeah, kind of.
Он был такой хмурый, что я боялся к нему подойти.
Andrei was even scared to come to you and shake your hand because he was so concentrated.
So when I started powerlifting, you and Dan Green at Raw Unity, that was my thing, man. Incredible. Just absolutely amazing.
Those were the days, man.
Yeah, that's what I'm about.
Желаю ему больше удачи.
He wishes you all the best. Good luck.
Oh,
and
thank you so
victories.
much. Thank
Всегда
you.
готов помочь, если вдруг понадобится.
If you need any help, he is always
Dude,
help.
honor me. Seriously, thank you so much.
So big.
My range then, it's 4 to 8 effective reps, and that none of those reps were easy, but only 3 of them were really, really hard. So in my head, I'm counting the reps, and then once it starts to get hard, I'm like, okay, now we're actually counting. For me, I have a pretty good feel of like what my RP is and stuff. So once it's over 8, it's hard. I really don't love RP for beginners. I feel like a lot of beginners don't have kind of a good sense of where their actual limits are. And so for those people, I like to go more in rep speed. So my training partner, Taylor, and I have this concept we call it VESP, where we're looking at the velocity and the effort of a rep, and that's kind of translating to your strength potential, right? So your velocity plus your effort is kind of related. So when the lift starts to slow down or the lift starts to feel heavy, one of those two. And if you're training for bodybuilding, at the beginning of the set, the rep should be fast and controlled, and the weight should not feel heavy. And so once one of those changes, then you can start counting those effective reps. So I'll probably do 1 or 2 more sets there. I just try and stick with 7 reps each time. So that set, a little bit easier. Last one, pretty typical when you're training for bodybuilding. First set or 2 won't feel great, and you'll kind of get into the flow once you get a better pump. Kind of centered my whole life around training to some regard. You know, before I started doing what I'm doing now, I got my PhD in the history of powerlifting and bodybuilding at the University of Texas, and that was a really great experience. That's when I started competing professionally. But before that, you know, my undergrad was in finance. I worked at Freddie Mac and Google, which are, you know, kind of big corporate companies, and I went to this presentation by a guy who was high up in marketing at Google. He was talking about his original dream was to open a restaurant. To be good as a restaurateur, you have to understand how to market, how to get your name out there. And so he learned all this stuff and got hired at Google and went that route. So at the end of the presentation, I asked him, I was like, so, you know, whatever happened at the restaurant, are you going to go back to that at some point? He's like, well, you know what? I got a wife and kids and a good job now, and I realized sometimes, you know, you just got to let those dreams go. And at the time, I was 23, 24. I was like, I'm not fucking doing that. So I quit a couple months later and went to school for the doctorate and started competing and everything. And I haven't looked back to that. For my top set, I'm going to add a little bit of chain, just because for this particular movement, like I mentioned, the camber puts a little bit more emphasis on the bottom end, but I want to focus on that mid end. So by adding the chains, getting that accommodating resistance to be a little bit heavier as I go towards lockout. I'm going to get the momentum off my chest and hopefully finish strong. We're going for a top triple, which is generally, I cycle through sets of 1 to 3 for my top set. Even when I'm doing bodybuilding for my heavy movement, that's kind of what I'm going for. So what I want to show is adding the chains. I see a lot of people do this wrong. On bench, on squat, people tend to be pretty good, but you want the chain deloaded to the bottom. And that's the way you're going to get the most out of it. If you just hook up a regular chain over the bar, that's how most people do it, it's fucking hanging here, and it's just wobbling around when you unteract, and that's just making you unstable and unsafe. Some people be a little bit smarter, and they'll use a daisy chain or a strap like this, and they'll set it up so that it's touching the ground when they unrack. And that's good because at least then they don't have the stability issue. But this isn't going to be completely deloaded on the bottom. There's still going to be a little bit of chain hanging. So the way I like to do things, instead of having this chain single looped, I'm going to double loop it. Got one length. I'm going to take it in thirds, just like that. Thank you.
Good.
It's heavy at the top. Last thing we're gonna do is a little bit of higher rep work. So I'm gonna superset this pec deck with some push-ups. And I think push-ups are a really overlooked movement because for most people, you can get a really good stretch on the pec, really full range of motion, good contraction through the entire range of motion. And for most people, it's not gonna hurt their joints too much. So they're a big favorite of mine. The problem, of course, is loading them heavily, and that's why we're supersetting. I'm not a huge fan of supersetting for any purpose other than to lower the weight that's necessary to use on a movement that you like. So for example, I'm a pretty strong squatter. My best squat ever is 805. And you know, I'm probably good for pretty close to that right now. So if I were training heavy on squats using 700 plus pounds week in, week out, my knees would probably be fucked for those high reps. So instead, I superset with leg extensions. I don't push leg extensions to failure, but I'll do those. I'll keep those steady throughout my entire mesocycle. And that way, when I do go to squat right after, I'll be able to use less weight, get the same stimulus for my quads, and hopefully keep my joints a little bit healthier in the long run. So same principle here. Exact same principle with the first movement. We're only counting the hard reps. So I was like 3 hard push-up reps and 1 hard pec deck rep. 2.5 hard push-up reps. So we'll call it 3. For this rep range, right, because these were very high reps, should really be shooting for about 12 total effective reps minimum. So it's gonna be hard to get there, but we'll make it happen. All right. So just finished this training session. Gonna eat. It went a little longer than expected, which again, typical for a travel session. Travel is one of my biggest challenges. Trying to stay in routine can be difficult, and that's why you meal prep and everything. But overall, a good session. I got my reps in. I was a teeny bit disappointed with the that top rep of the Cadillac press. I think I overestimated my ability with those chains just a little bit. Again, that's my weak point. All in all, pretty happy with how the session went. The big thing was on my first movement, my last superset, making sure I got all those effective reps in. The big thing I want to call attention to on that pec deck, that one's a real hard one for me because I really want to do that internal rotation. And so keeping in that externally rotated position, really trying to squeeze, and you may have noticed me messing with my finger position throughout the reps. Finger position actually really big. A lot of people don't think about it, but the more you're squeezing with your index finger and your thumb, the more it's going to be bicep. The more you're squeezing with the pinky, the more it's going to be lat and tricep. So trying to keep the hand out of it entirely and really isolate those pecs is difficult for me. But overall, I think everything went well. This is kind of a little bit of a transition week. I like to plan those into my training whenever I'm traveling or something like that, so that I can not necessarily obsess over my numbers too much when I know I'm going to be using different equipment for the majority of my off season. But I think the big takeaways are, you're looking in each Each set and each exercise, you're looking to count up those number of really hard reps, the ones where you feel like you're really challenged to stay in position, really challenged to hold that mind-muscle connection. Those are the ones that count. Finding the movements that put you in the correct positions to target your weaknesses, whether that's a weak range of motion or a weak muscle group, and usually those are going to overlap. And third, to incorporate heavy training into your work. You know, you got to be safe with it, you got to be smart about it, but you can't just always be doing the pump work. You can't always be, you know, adding 2.5 pounds to every set, every rep. That's great, but over time you need to periodize your training. You need to focus on the really heavy stuff. You need to be making those big jumps as long as they're within your ability, and you always need to be striving to get stronger if you want to get bigger. So that wraps it up.